My son's lavish wedding, meant to be a joyous day, felt like a betrayal. His fiancée, Brooke, demanded every cent of my life savings, dismissing my late wife's memory and our family traditions. I simply watched, quiet, as the bills piled up. They had no idea I was quietly planning a different kind of ceremony for them. This is my story. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. The silence in the house often felt louder than any alarm bell I'd ever heard in my 30 years as a fire captain. 3 years. 3 years since Eleanor left me, stolen by a relentless cancer that had slowly, cruelly eroded her vibrant spirit. My uniform, meticulously pressed, hung in the closet, a testament to a life of duty and service, a stark contrast to the quiet, empty rooms that now echoed only with memories. Sometimes, for a fleeting moment, I'd walk into the kitchen and almost expect to see her there, humming softly as she prepared coffee, her scent still subtly clinging to the air, a ghost that refused to fully depart. Her clothes were still in her closet, neatly folded, as if she might return any moment. I couldn't bring myself to clear them out, not yet. Grief, I'd learned, wasn't a linear path. It was a labyrinth where forgotten corners held fresh pain. Eleanor and I had one child, our son Ethan. He was our world, the very air we breathed. We poured every ounce of our love, every waking moment, and every hard-earned dollar into his future. We wanted him to have the best, a life filled with opportunities we hadn't had. I worked double shifts, the roar of the fire engine, the adrenaline of a rescue, often blurring into the quiet exhaustion of another dawn. Eleanor, bless her heart, took on extra sewing jobs, her nimble fingers meticulously crafting garments, the hum of her machine a constant, comforting backdrop to our lives. Vacations? We laughed at the idea. Every penny was for Ethan, for his education, for his chance to shine. And shine he did. Ethan graduated with honors from Washington University, a proud, brilliant young man. I remember that day vividly. Eleanor, already weakened by her illness, had rallied with an astonishing surge of strength. Her eyes, usually heavy with fatigue, sparkled with an almost fierce joy as she watched him cross the stage. She grasped my hand tightly, a fragile smile on her face, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Our boy Arthur," she'd whispered, her voice reedy but clear. "He's going to change the world." It was one of her last truly bright days, a memory I held on to, sacred and bittersweet. A few years later, Ethan met Brooke at a marketing firm in Chicago. From the start, I never much cared for her. There was a sharpness to her eyes, a calculating glint that unsettled me. She was beautiful, yes, in a polished, almost sterile way, but there was an absence of warmth, a lack of genuine interest in anything beyond surface pleasantries. I saw it, I felt it, but I swallowed my concerns, unwilling to cast a shadow on Ethan's apparent happiness. He was smitten, completely enamored, and as any father knows, you want your child to be happy, even if you have nagging doubts about the source of that happiness. Brooke's first visit to our home, when Eleanor was already bedridden, confirmed my initial misgivings. She spent a grand total of 7 minutes in Eleanor's room, perched stiffly on the edge of the chair, offering a perfunctory, "It's nice to meet you," before retreating to the living room, complaining about the stuffy air. Eleanor, ever the saint, made excuses for her, attributing it to shyness, to unfamiliarity with illness. "She's just young, Arthur," she'd said, her voice weak but still kind. I should have seen the warning signs then, the stark contrast between Eleanor's boundless empathy and Brooke's chilling indifference. I ignored them for Ethan's happiness, a decision I would come to regret with a bitterness that settled deep in my bones. Brooke's behavior at Eleanor's funeral was even worse. While I stood numbly by the casket accepting condolences, she was openly complaining about the length of the service to Ethan, tapping her foot impatiently, and even checking her phone, a look of utter boredom etched across her perfect face. It was an insult to Eleanor, to our family, to everything sacred. I could feel the anger simmering beneath my grief, but again, I pushed it down. Ethan was hurting, and I didn't want to cause more friction. I just wanted to get through the day. 6 months after Eleanor's burial, the phone rang. It was Ethan, his voice bubbling over with excitement. "Dad, she said yes. Brooke and I are getting married." My heart sank a little, even as I forced a smile into my voice. That's wonderful, son. Congratulations. Then came the details. A lavish wedding at the Plaza Hotel. My stomach churned. The Plaza. That meant money, a lot of money. Ethan, I ventured carefully, that's quite a venue. How are you planning to fund this? There was a slight pause, then Ethan's voice, a little too casual. Well, Dad, we always talked about the nest egg for my future, right? Mom and you saved so much for me. I figured this was a big part of my future. My nest egg, Eleanor and I's nest egg, our life savings painstakingly accumulated over decades of sacrifice, meant for his future. Yes, but not for a single extravagant day for a woman who couldn't even pretend to care about his dying mother. I crunched the numbers that night. The initial quote Ethan relayed was around $60,000, more than half of what Eleanor and I had put aside. A lifetime of doing without, of patching up old clothes, of driving battered cars, of missing out on simple pleasures, all distilled into one colossal sum for a single event. My first instinct was to say no, to protect what little was left, to honor Eleanor's memory. But then I pictured Ethan's beaming face, his excitement, the joy in his voice. I remembered Eleanor's words at his graduation. Our boy, Arthur. And I agreed. For your happiness, son, I told him, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The following months were a whirlwind of planning. Though planning is too generous a word, it was more like an endless cascade of bills and demands, all funneled directly to me, not to Ethan, but to me. Brooke would call, or more often email, with a new vendor invoice, a new necessity that had somehow been overlooked. The flowers simply must be imported French roses, Arthur, she had declared once, as if discussing the weather. Anything less would ruin the aesthetic. I tried foolishly to interject some semblance of our family's values, our traditions. What about having Reverend Daniel officiate? I'd asked Ethan, referring to the kind, gentle man who had presided over Eleanor's funeral, a fixture in our community and our lives. Ethan brought it up to Brooke, who promptly dismissed the idea. Oh, Arthur, no, she'd said, without even a hint of apology. Reverend Daniel is just not our aesthetic. And the family church? It's such an old place. We need something grander, more modern. My heart tightened. Our church, where Ethan was baptized, where Eleanor and I had exchanged vows, an old place. The budget, initially a staggering $60,000, swelled to over $70,000 within weeks. Each new invoice felt like a punch to the gut. Each dismissal of my suggestions a deliberate slight. Eventually, I had to dip into my retirement principal, the money I'd counted on to see me through my golden years, to afford the medical care I might need, to simply live without constant financial worry. It was disappearing, fast, for a woman who saw me only as a bottomless ATM, a means to an end. But I kept smiling. Oh, I kept smiling. The trendy downtown restaurant thrummed with a muted buzz, a stark contrast to the quiet of my home. It was the rehearsal dinner, a night meant for joyous anticipation. I had donned a new navy suit, crisp and sharp, purchased specifically for this occasion. Eleanor would have approved. Arthur, you always look so handsome in blue, she used to say, her eyes twinkling with affection. Her words, a sweet echo, made me straighten my tie. The decor was what they called minimalist chic. Bare brick walls, industrial lighting, and tables adorned with single, sculptural flower arrangements that looked like they cost more than my monthly grocery bill. At a corner table, Brooke's parents, Richard and Suzanne Harrington, held court. They were perfectly coiffed, impeccably dressed in designer labels, a picture of refined disinterest. They offered me a brief, almost imperceptible nod as I approached, their eyes quickly darting away, as if my presence disrupted their carefully curated scene. I felt like an interloper in a world not meant for me. Then I saw Ethan, my son. He looked different, nervous. His suit, while expensive, hung a little loose on his frame, betraying a recent weight loss. Shadows bloomed under his eyes, and he kept running a hand through his hair, a habit he had when he was stressed. My heart ached for him. He caught my eye and offered a weak, apologetic smile. I sidled up to him, trying to be discreet. Son, I murmured, can I speak with you for a moment? I pulled out a plain white envelope from my inner jacket pocket. This is for you and Brooke, for your new life together. Inside was a check for $10,000. It's the last of my accessible savings, I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. Use it for whatever you need, a down payment, a cushion. Don't tell Brooke about it just yet. Let's keep this between us. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. He looked at the envelope, then at me. A wave of genuine emotion softened his strained features, and he pulled me into a tight hug. You did, he whispered, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. Thank you, really. I know Kelly can be a lot sometimes. He meant Brooke. He always got their names mixed up when he was agitated. It was a small concession, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed facade he'd built around his engagement. But it was enough to momentarily soothe the ache in my chest. He knew. He saw it too. Just then the wedding planner, a severe woman with a tightly pulled ponytail, clapped her hands. All right, everyone, let's run through the ceremony, shall we? Standard order, you all have your cue cards. She began rattling off names, directing people to their positions. Arthur, you're the father of the groom. You'll be standing here stage right. I nodded, a small sense of relief washing over me. At least I had a place, a visible role. I started to move towards my designated spot, just behind Ethan. Excuse me, Arthur. Brooke's voice cut through the soft murmur of conversations, sharp and clear, stopping me in my tracks. Everyone turned, their eyes shifting from her to me. She stood a few feet away, her hands on her hips, a perfectly manicured brow raised in an expression of mild annoyance. What are you doing? She asked, her tone implying I was doing something inherently wrong. My confusion must have been evident. I'm going to my spot, Brooke, I replied, gesturing vaguely towards the position the planner had indicated. Brooke let out a small, huffy sigh, as if she were explaining something painstakingly obvious to a dim-witted child. Oh no, Arthur. There's been a slight change, a last-minute adjustment for balance. Ethan will be walking with my parents. She gestured toward Richard and Suzanne, who stood stiffly beside her, looking vaguely pleased. You see, she continued, turning to address the room, as if this were an official announcement. I don't have a father figure in my life anymore, so it feels more appropriate for Ethan to walk with my parents, to create a sense of unity. My mind reeled. She doesn't have a father figure? Her father, Richard Harrington, stood less than 10 feet away, listening to her with a placid smile. The implication, though unspoken, was clear. My place, my role as Ethan's father, was being erased, replaced by her perfectly packaged narrative. I wasn't informed of this change, I said, my voice feeling strangely hollow, detached. Brooke waved a dismissive hand, a flick of her wrist that felt like a slap. It's just a small thing, Arthur. Nothing to worry about. You can just sit in the family section, in the back, with the rest of them. Her gaze swept over the gathered relatives and friends, a group now all staring at me with varying degrees of awkwardness and pity. I felt frozen. My new suit, the one Eleanor would have complimented, suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. My throat was tight, a knot of humiliation twisting in my gut. My only role, the one sacred duty of a father on his son's wedding day, was being publicly stripped away, reduced to nothing but an inconvenience to be shunted aside, in front of friends, in front of family, in front of my son. Arthur, you're holding up the rehearsal. Brooke's voice sharpened, cutting through my daze. Her eyes were cold, impatient. She had moved on, already calculating the next step, while I stood there, rooted, an obstacle to her perfect vision. I looked at Ethan then. He was standing beside Brooke, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the highly polished floor. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at his shoes, utterly silent. No protest, no explanation, no acknowledgement, just silence. The ache in my chest intensified, a sharp, searing pain that went deeper than any physical wound. That was it. That was the moment. After years of bending, of enduring Brooke's dismissals, her veiled insults, her casual cruelty, something inside me finally broke. The silent rage, the patient understanding, the desperate hope that Ethan would see, would intervene. It all fractured and crumbled into dust. This wasn't just about a change in the rehearsal lineup. This was about respect. This was about Eleanor's memory. This was about everything I had sacrificed. A calm, chilling resolve settled over me. I took a deep breath, the air burning slightly in my lungs. "You know what, Brooke?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady, even carrying just enough to cut through the restaurant's background hum. Everyone stopped, sensing a shift. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about my place here," I continued, my gaze unwavering, meeting her cold stare. "You've made it abundantly clear that I'm not welcome in this wedding." "Not really. I'm just a checkbook." A collective gasp, soft yet distinct, rippled through the chic downtown restaurant. Suzanne Harrington, Brooke's mother, pressed a hand to her chest, her perfectly made-up face aghast. Ethan finally looked up. His eyes, wide with a flicker of panic, met mine. He started to speak, a desperate, "Dad, please," forming on his lips. I raised a hand, a gesture I'd used countless times on a fire ground, signaling for quiet, for attention. It stopped him cold. My gaze never left the Brooks, a silent challenge in the cavernous space. "Let's be clear, Brooke," I continued, my voice measured, cutting through the sudden silence. "I'm not just a checkbook. I'm Arthur Miller. I am Ethan's father, and for the past 6 months I have funded this entire charade." I began to list them, each payment a fresh sting in my memory, each number a brick chipped away from my future. The venue, the plaza, the caterers, the florist, your imported French roses, I believe. The designer gown you're wearing for the rehearsal dinner, I assume for tomorrow's big day. The band, the photographer, the open bar, the bespoke invitations that cost more than my first car. That's over $70,000, Brooke. $70,000 of my life savings. Money Eleanor and I worked our entire lives for, to give Ethan a good start. That's what fathers do. They support their children. But support, I emphasized, my voice hardening slightly, goes both ways. Brooke's face, usually so composed, flushed a furious red. Her carefully constructed facade began to crack. "This is completely inappropriate," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with venom. "You're making a scene." I allowed myself a mirthless chuckle. "I'm making a scene? Sweetheart, you just publicly demoted me from father of the groom to random guest in the back, all because my actual presence doesn't fit your manufactured narrative of a fatherless bride. I think the scene was already in progress." "Dad, please," Ethan interjected again, stepping slightly forward, his voice a plea. "Can we just talk about this later?" "Not here." "Later?" I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Later, Ethan? When have you ever wanted to talk about it later? I tried to talk to you about the escalating one. I tried to talk to you about your mother's wishes. I tried to talk to you about Brooke's behavior. Every time, you brushed me off. Every time, you said it would work out. Every time, you put her first. There is no later when it comes to being erased." Brooke, her face now a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, stepped directly in front of Ethan, shielding him, as if I were a threat. Her voice was low, trembling with fury, but still audible in the stunned silence of the room. "You know what? You're right, Arthur. You don't belong here. You're just a stone old man who can't accept that Ethan has a new life now. A better life with me. A life free from your old-fashioned ideas and your tired stories. You're not wanted here. You're extra baggage. You're just in the way." Her words hung in the air, a cruel, blunt instrument. Instead of anger, I felt a profound sadness settle over me, heavy and cold, not just for myself, but for Ethan. To hear her speak like that, to realize the true colors of the woman he was marrying, and for him to say nothing, that was the deepest cut. I looked at him one last time, my eyes silently pleading, begging him to acknowledge me, to step in, to show me that he was still my son, the boy Eleanor and I had raised with such love. But he remained silent, unmoving, his gaze once again fixed on the floor. His silence was louder than any insult Brooke could hurl. The last flicker of hope died. It was done. With a quiet resolve, I reached into my inner jacket pocket, pulled out the envelope containing the $10,000 check, and placed it carefully on a nearby table, right next to a sculptural arrangement of calla lilies. "I'll see myself out," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet firm. I turned, my new navy suit feeling heavy and meaningless, and walked slowly towards the exit. Each step echoed the finality of my decision. As I reached the door, Brooke's voice, sharp and triumphant, pierced the silence once more. "And don't think you can just walk out and we'll come begging, Arthur. This wedding is happening with or without your approval. We don't need you." I didn't turn back. The night air was a shock to my system, cool and unforgiving. I got into my truck, the familiar scent of leather and old coffee, a small comfort. I didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. It was an exercise firefighters were taught after particularly traumatic incidents. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 6. Focus on the rhythm. Ground yourself. I was shaking. Inside my empty house, the silence was no longer peaceful, but oppressive. I walked past the framed photo of Eleanor on the mantelpiece. Her smile, gentle and knowing, seemed to pierce through me. I remembered her words, spoken so often, always with love and a touch of concern. "You always fight for others, Arthur. You rush into burning buildings. You protect strangers. Don't forget to fight for yourself sometimes." And in that moment, staring at her smiling face, the full weight of her words hit me. I hadn't been fighting for myself, not for a long, long time. I had let Ethan and Brooke walk all over me, drain my accounts, dismiss my suggestions, and now publicly humiliate me. I had allowed my love for my son to be weaponized against me, my sacrifices taken for granted. But no more. The silence of the house, the ghost of Eleanor's memory, the sting of Brooke's words, and Ethan's crushing silence solidified a new resolve within me. It was time to fight, not for them, but for myself. The fear of losing Ethan, of pushing him further away, had been a silent, potent force driving my compliance. It was that fear that made me swallow Brooke's insults, that made me empty my savings. I had convinced myself I was doing it for Ethan's happiness, for the stability of his new life. But now, staring at Eleanor's smiling face in the photograph, I knew I had been wrong. She wouldn't have wanted this. Not for me, and certainly not for Ethan. Eleanor, with her unwavering sense of right and wrong, would never have stood by while I bankrolled my own erasure from Ethan's life. She would never have wanted her son to marry a woman who treated family, and the memory of his own mother, with such cold disdain. The realization solidified in my mind a hard, unyielding truth. That night, well past the hour when most people were settling down, I pulled out the neatly organized folder. Inside were all the meticulous details of the wedding planning. Contracts, receipts, vendor contact information, everything Brooke had sent me, expecting me to simply pay without question. My fire captain's training, which demanded precision and meticulous attention to detail, had ironically ensured I had every single piece of paper I needed. My first call was to the Plaza Hotel. It was nearly 11 o'clock, but a recording directed me to an emergency line for event cancellations. A groggy but professional event manager answered. "I need to cancel the Harrington-Peterson wedding," I stated, my voice calm, devoid of the tremor that had rattled me earlier. "It's scheduled for next Saturday." There was a pause, a rustling of papers on the other end. "Sir, are you aware of the substantial cancellation penalties at such short notice, especially for a large event like that?" "I am fully aware," I replied, my voice firm, "and I am prepared to pay them. I insist on immediate cancellation." "Perhaps I should speak with the bride or groom, Mr. Miller," the manager suggested, a hint of confusion in her voice. "There's no need," I cut in politely but unequivocally. "I am the financially responsible party, the signatory on all contracts and agreements. The wedding is off, effective immediately." I heard her typing, the click-clack of percussive accompaniment to my resolve. "I expect a written confirmation of this cancellation sent to my email address within the hour," I added. "And please inform all your in-house vendors, catering, florist, any others directly contracted through the Plaza, that their services are no longer required for this event." She agreed, sounding a little dazed but professional. Next, I worked my way down the list. The photographer, a flamboyant artist with a flair for capturing candid moments. Cancellation, I stated, effective immediately. He grumbled about his deposit, but the contract was clear. Non-refundable, but no further payments due. The videographer, who promised cinematic storytelling. The jazz band, booked for a 5-hour set. The rental company for the special lighting and the designer chairs Brooke insisted upon. The bakery, responsible for the 8-tier cake, a confection that rivaled the Plaza's architecture in its grandeur. Each call was met with varying degrees of surprise and disappointment, but each was handled with a calm authority I hadn't known I still possessed. Each call became easier than the last, the words flowing more smoothly, the resolve strengthening with every "I need to cancel." It felt less like dismantling a watching and more like severing a parasitic connection. Each vendor hung up. I felt another link in the chain of my liberation snap. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for months, for years, seemed to lift, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The final call was to my bank. I spoke to an automated system first, then waited for a representative. "I need to place an immediate freeze on all my accounts and credit cards," and well, I explained, choosing my words carefully. "Compromised information." The representative, a chipper young woman named Sarah, asked for details. "My financial information has been compromised through extreme generosity," I clarified, a wry humor finally finding its way into my voice. "I want to ensure no further transactions can be made without my explicit in-person authorization." Sarah, after a moment of confused silence, efficiently processed my request. No more surprise bills. No more demands for instant payment. My financial lifeline, severed from Brooke's avarice. It was past midnight when I finally hung up the phone for the last time. The house was still, the only sound the quiet tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a generous measure of good bourbon, the kind Eleanor had bought me for my 50th birthday, and walked back into the living room. I raised my glass to Eleanor's photo, her gentle smile reflected in the amber liquid. "I fought for myself tonight, Maggie," I whispered, using her affectionate nickname for me, one only she ever used. "I hope you're proud." A profound peace settled over me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. The bourbon warmed my throat, a comforting burn. I went to bed and, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I slept soundly, deeply, free from the gnawing anxiety that had plagued my nights. The nightmares of burning buildings and Eleanor's fading smile were replaced by an emptiness that felt surprisingly like quiet joy. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to hear how this dramatic tale unfolds. Your support means the world to me. The storm hit precisely at 9 o'clock the next morning. My phone, which I had left on silent, began to buzz with an insistent, frantic rhythm. Ethan. Text messages piled up, each one more urgent than the last. "Dad, what's going on?" "The Plaza just called. They said the wedding is canceled." "Dad, call me!" Then the call started, a rapid-fire succession that I deliberately ignored. I knew this was coming. I simply poured myself another cup of coffee and savored the quiet morning. Around noon, the doorbell began to ring, not just once, but in a prolonged, furious assault. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. There they were. Ethan, his face flushed and agitated, stood with his fist hovering over the doorbell. Beside him, Brooke paced wildly, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice a frantic buzz of denial. I took a deep breath, a calm I hadn't felt in months settling over me. Then I opened the door. Ethan exploded immediately. "Dad, what the hell did you do? The Plaza just told Brooke the wedding's canceled. Our wedding, what did you do?" His voice was high-pitched, laced with disbelief and betrayal. "Come in, both of you," I said, my voice unnervingly calm, even to my own ears. Brooke, still on her phone, barged past Ethan and me, not even bothering to acknowledge my presence. "No, no, you must have it wrong," she was saying into the receiver, her voice strained. "There's no way it's canceled. We're getting married next Saturday." I closed the door gently behind Ethan. "She's not wrong, Brooke," I stated, loud enough for her to hear. She stopped pacing, her head snapping up, her eyes wide. "I canceled all the arrangements last night. Every single one. Ethan gaped at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. But why? How could you? I stopped enabling this farce, Ethan, I replied, my gaze steady. After what happened last night, after the way Brooke spoke to me, after your silence, I decided that enough was enough. Last night was just a misunderstanding, Ethan insisted, his voice cracking. Brooke was stressed, Dad. We both were. It was a lot of pressure. Stressed? I scoffed softly, shaking my head. Stressed people don't publicly humiliate their future father-in-law, not if they have an ounce of decency. She called me a sad old man, extra baggage, in the way. She dismissed your mother's memory as old-fashioned ideas. And you, Ethan, you stood there and said nothing and not a word. Ethan recoiled slightly, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. What was I supposed to say, Dad? You were both upset. My composure finally frayed a little, my voice rising with the frustration I'd held in for so long. You were supposed to stand up for me, Ethan. For your father. For the man who bankrolled your entire future and was now paying for this wedding. You were supposed to remind her who I was, what I mean to you, what your mother and I sacrificed. You were supposed to have my back. The words hung heavy in the air, weighted with years of unspoken disappointment. Brooke, having finally finished her frantic phone call, slammed her device onto the coffee table with a resounding thud. Her eyes blazed with a cold, terrifying fury. This is unbelievable. I've had 3 vendors call me in the last hour. The florist, the band, the pastry chef. They all say everything is canceled. What kind of spiteful, vindictive old man does something like this? I met her stare, unblinking. The kind of man who has finally taken back control of his money and his dignity. Brooke. It was a gift, she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. You gave us the money. You can't just take it back. I didn't take it back, I corrected calmly, despite the churning in my stomach. I paid the cancellation fees as per the contracts I signed. The vendors have been paid for their time and services up to this point, but I will not be spending another penny on this wedding, or on anything else related to you, Brooke. Ethan, looking utterly miserable, stepped between us, his hands held up in a placating gesture. Brooke, Dad, please. We can fix this. Brooke is sorry, Dad. She didn't mean it. Brooke's eyes flashed, her head snapping towards Ethan. I'm not sorry, Ethan. He deserved it. He's always interfering, always trying to push his outdated ideas. His constant reminders of your mother are morbid and depressing. He just wants to control everything. The last part hit me harder than anything else. Morbid and depressing. That's how she saw Eleanor's memory. That's how she viewed the woman who had given Ethan life, who had loved him with every fiber of her being. My son's fiancée. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the living room. Ethan looked utterly slapped, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Even Brooke, for a fleeting second, seemed to register that she had crossed a line, a slight pause in her indignant fury. I felt a strange, chilling calm. My voice when I spoke was soft, almost a whisper, yet it resonated with an undeniable finality. And there it is. The truth comes out. Brooke, Jesus Christ, Ethan murmured, shaking his head, finally looking at her with something akin to disbelief. But Brooke, never one to back down, doubled down, her chin jutting out defiantly. What? I'm just being honest, Ethan. I'm sick of him trying to turn our wedding into some tribute to your mother. It's our day, not hers. I turned my gaze back to Ethan, my heart aching with a pain far deeper than any anger. Is that what you think too, Ethan? That honoring your mother's memory at your wedding, the woman who gave you everything, is morbid? That she's the past you need to be free from? He couldn't meet my eyes. He mumbled something, staring at the floor, about looking to the future, about not dwelling on the past. My voice broke then, a raw edge of grief and betrayal finally surfacing. Eleanor, your mother, who worked double shifts, who sewed late into the night, who battled cancer with a smile on her face just so she could see you graduate. The woman who poured every ounce of her being into giving you a better life. Is she just the past now, Ethan? Is that all she is to you? Ethan's eyes welled up, but no tears fell. Brooke, sensing a weakness, made a disgusted sound. Oh, here we go with the guilt trip. Ethan, you owe him nothing. His job was to raise you. He did it. End of story. I kept my eyes on Ethan, ignoring Brooke completely. Do you believe that, son? That a parent's love, their sacrifices, come with no obligations? No obligation for respect? No obligation for loyalty? No obligation to simply acknowledge their existence? Before Ethan could stammer a reply, Brooke's phone rang. She snatched it up, her face instantly transforming into a mask of sugary sweetness as she excused herself into the kitchen, her voice barely audible as she cooed into the phone. The sudden shift was jarring, a stark illustration of her calculated facade. Ethan, as if deflated, collapsed onto the couch, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Dad, he pleaded, his voice thin, what are we going to do? How do we fix this disaster? The wedding is in 7 days. You want to fix it? I asked, sitting opposite him, my voice calmer now that Brooke was out of earshot. You want to honor your mother's memory and your own dignity? We could scale it back, have a simpler ceremony at the church. Reverend Daniel would still officiate. It could be intimate, meaningful. He shook his head immediately. Brooke would never agree to that. You know that, Dad. So what do you want, Ethan? I pressed, truly wanting to understand the depth of his delusion. What do you want? He looked at me confused, as if the question itself was foreign. I want Brooke to be happy, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. The realization hit me then, sharp and cold. He wanted Brooke to be happy, even if it meant it at everyone else's expense, even if it meant at his own. Just then, Brooke stormed back in from the kitchen, her face a mask of fresh fury. That was the wedding planner. She quit. She said she can't work with unreasonable people and unforeseen cancellations. You ruined everything, Arthur. Everything. My patience, already stretched thin, finally snapped. I stood up, my posture straighter than it had been in years. No, Brooke, I said, my voice resonating with a quiet authority that silenced her. You ruined everything. You ruined it by treating me like garbage, by dismissing my family, by insulting the memory of the woman who raised my son, your future husband. You ruined it by thinking my love for Ethan and my money was a bottomless well for your selfish desires. She opened her mouth to retort, perhaps to launch another tirade, but I wasn't finished. And speaking of money, I continued, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my face. That supplementary credit card you just pulled out of your purse, the one I gave Ethan, the one you've been using? My smile widened, cold and knowing. It won't work, Brooke. I froze all my accounts last night. Every single one. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in immediate suspicion. She fumbled with the card, pulling it out. What are you talking about? This is for emergencies. You wouldn't dare. Oh, I dared, Ma, I confirmed, my voice dripping with satisfaction. And since we're talking about money and about emergencies, perhaps you'd like to explain the $25,000 charge for the Four Seasons Bora Bora honeymoon. The one you booked last week without my knowledge or consent, on the account you claimed was only for wedding emergencies. You didn't even have the decency to wait until after the wedding, did you, Brooke? Ethan's head snapped towards her, his eyes blazing, finally seeing something ugly and undeniable. Ethan paled, his gaze snapping from me to Brooke, a dawning horror in his eyes. Brooke's usually sharp features went utterly blank, a mask of shock replacing her furious indignation. For once, she was speechless, caught entirely off guard. Bora Bora, Ethan whispered, his voice incredulous. What are you talking about, Dad? The Four Seasons, I clarified, my voice steady, eyes fixed on Brooke. $25,000 charged last week to the supplementary card I gave you, Ethan. For emergencies? A booking confirmation was sent to your email, Brooke, not Ethan's. Brooke finally found her voice, a desperate, almost pathetic denial. I don't know anything about that. It must be a mistake. I would never. A mistake? I raised an eyebrow, a cold, hard glint in my eye. Funny, it has your name on the reservation. The dates align perfectly with the week after your scheduled wedding. And I highly doubt the Four Seasons accidentally sent you the confirmation for someone else's $25,000 honeymoon. Ethan looked sickened. Brooke, he said, his voice trembling, you told me your parents were paying for the honeymoon. You said they booked a surprise for us. Brooke's eyes darted frantically between us. Her carefully constructed composure was crumbling. Well, my father's investments have been complicated lately. I just thought, he's so busy he wouldn't even notice. It was a gift from Arthur anyway, wasn't it? For our future? Her logic was twisted, self-serving, and transparently desperate. The betrayal hit me then, a physical blow, sharper and more painful than any of her verbal assaults. You stole my credit card information, I stated, the words heavy with disbelief. You used it to book a luxury honeymoon without my knowledge or consent, then tried to pin it on your own parents. You committed fraud. It wasn't stealing, Brooke cried, her voice cracking, resorting to a desperate plea. Your family. Family helps family. You said it yourself. Family helps family, yes, I agreed. But family doesn't lie, family doesn't steal, and family doesn't use the trust placed in them as an ATM for their personal extravagance. Family doesn't insult the memory of someone who loved you. Ethan looked like he might actually throw up. He finally stepped away from Brooke, a gulf opening between them. Brooke, he said, his voice low, filled with a new, dangerous edge. What else haven't you told me? What else have you done? Brooke, seeing her carefully constructed world collapsing around her, immediately burst into tears. Manufactured tears, I knew instantly. The kind that appeared on cue, designed to elicit sympathy and deflect blame. Ethan, baby, it's not like that. He's just trying to turn you against me. He's always hated me. I watched her performance with a detached cynicism. Brooke, I interrupted, cutting through her theatrical sobs. The unauthorized charge of $25,000 on my credit card, using information you obtained under false pretenses, that's grand theft. That's credit card fraud. That's a felony in the state of Missouri. Her fake tears dried instantly. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with genuine anger now. Are you threatening me, old man? I'm stating facts, bro. Brung, I replied calmly. Facts that a prosecutor would find very interesting. Ethan, who had been staring at Brooke's suddenly tearless face, finally moved. He stood up straight, his shoulders squaring, a newfound resolve hardening his features. Brooke, he said, his voice surprisingly firm, go wait for me in the car. I need to talk to my father, alone. Brooke, recognizing the shift in his tone, the steel in his eyes, knew she had lost this battle. She glared at me, then at Ethan, her mouth a tight, angry line. Without another word, she stomped out of the house, the front door slamming shut, with a resounding finality that vibrated through the quiet living room. Silence once again. Just Ethan and me. He sank back onto the couch, his face in his hands. I didn't know, Dad, he whispered, his voice raw with shame. I swear I didn't know about any of it. She told me her parents were paying for the honeymoon. She always said it was from them. I sat down next to him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. I know, son. I truly believe you didn't know, but now you do. And that changes things, doesn't it? I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Ethan, after all you've learned tonight, after the lies, the theft, the disrespect, the way she spoke about your mother, do you still want to marry her? Is this what love looks like? Is this the woman you want to spend the rest of your life with? He was silent for a long time, staring blankly at the far wall. I listed Brooke's transgressions, each one a nail in the coffin of his illusion. She stole from me. She lied to you. She disrespected your mother's memory in our own home, called her morbid. She's driven a wedge between us, between father and son. She's shown you clearly who she truly is. He remained silent, his mind clearly reevaluating everything he thought he knew, every belief he held about their relationship. I watched him, hoping, praying he would choose wisely. After a long, agonizing moment, he finally spoke, his voice barely audible. She makes me happy, Dad, he confessed, the words filled with a terrible, self-defeating honesty. She makes me happy, even at the expense of everyone else's happiness. The fallout was swift and predictably theatrical. Brooke, true to form, immediately launched a full-scale social media campaign against me. Her carefully curated posts, filled with tearful selfies and vague accusations, painted me as a vindictive old man, mentally unstable, and an abusive father who had cruelly ruined his son's dream wedding. Her loyal, equally superficial friends rallied around her, flooding the comments with outrage and manufactured sympathy. My phone rang again. It was Ethan. "Dad," he said, his voice weary, "Brooke's gone public. She's saying terrible things about you." "I expected no less," I replied, a calm I hadn't thought possible. "Are you calling to defend her?" "No," he said, and I heard a tremor of something new in his voice. "I just wanted to warn you, and I'm seeing a side of Brooke I never wanted to acknowledge before. I don't know what to do, Dad." An hour later, Suzanne Harrington, Brooke's mother, called, her voice sharp with aristocratic indignation. "Arthur, what in heaven's name do you think you're doing? You will reinstate that wedding, and you will apologize to my daughter immediately. This is an embarrassment." "Mrs. Harrington," I said, cutting her off, my voice even, "perhaps you should ask your daughter why she felt the need to steal $25,000 from my credit card to book a honeymoon. Or perhaps why she spent the last few months verbally abusing me and disrespecting the memory of my late wife. You've clearly enabled this behavior for far too long." "Don't expect me to." There was a stunned silence on the other end before she abruptly hung up. The satisfaction was minimal. The exhaustion, profound. 3 days later, I heard a tentative knock on my door. It was Ethan alone. He looked terrible, unshaven, his eyes hollow, dressed in crumpled clothes. "Dad," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. Can I stay here for a while?" I didn't hesitate. "Of course, son, this is your home." I opened the door wide, a silent invitation. He walked in, collapsing onto the couch where so much had transpired just days before. He still wouldn't look at me, but his presence was a step, a monumental step, towards healing. 4 days after that, a Tuesday afternoon, Ethan came down from his old bedroom, clutching something in his hand. His face was a mixture of shock and disgust. "Dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "look what I found." He held out Eleanor's engagement ring, the one I had thought was safely tucked away in my fireproof safe. The one I had given her decades ago, a symbol of our unwavering love. He had found it hidden deep within Brooke's jewelry box while looking for a pair of cufflinks he'd left behind. A cold dread washed over me. I remembered months ago when I'd briefly opened the safe to retrieve some important documents. Brooke had been in the living room, excusing herself to the bathroom just before I'd unlocked it.